All right, I'm honored to be here. I want to thank Peter and all the folks who helped organize this and allowed me to be here. I realize the irony of me coming from the United States at this particular moment. It doesn't seem like I'm representing a country that is engaged in carrying work at this time, and I apologize for that, and I'm kind of disgusted and sad about what is going on in there. But it also points to the fact that now more than ever we need to engage in this kind of care work. Okay, so this talk will engage the book Revolutionary Care, but it will the general sweep of it is I'm going to start with a story, and all of the chapters of my book, and actually even going back to embodied care, they begin with anecdotes or short stories, and I try to concretize the ideas in the chapter. And so we're going to begin with a story. I want to address the question of does care ethics make sense in the present moment and all that's going on in the world today? And then finally, what is so revolutionary about care? Those will be integrated throughout. Let me just say a few things about the book. As you saw, Peter held it up. It is not a particularly lengthy book. The first half of the book lays a kind of theoretical foundation for what I want to do. I engage the concept of good care. What is good care? And that will come out in the presentation. What are the norms of care? What does it mean to have a commitment to care? Commitment's a very important word to me in this context. And the idea of an ethos of care, a spirit of care. Can there be a care spirituality? So that's the theoretical framework. And then the second half of the book is a series of provocations. One thing I found with many care theorists is that they're often, because care theory doesn't have rules or a set of requirements or commandments of any kind, that care theorists were often a little bit trepidatious about engaging some tough issues. And so I have a series of provocations in the second half. And what I'm claiming is, if you buy my story in the first half, the theories, then could you consider, that's why I want to provoke you to consider some of these radical ideas. I say radical by popular standards. And so the second half of the book addresses feminism, why we need to combat toxic masculinity, socialism, why we need to have an economy that is care-centered, humanism, and why dogmatic positions are troublesome in advancing care. And then finally, the most controversial of all, veganism, as we consider how care works with more non-human beings. So that's the sweep of the book. This presentation will mostly address the first half, but if you want me to say controversial things, you can ask me about some of those other parts. And one more thing I want to say before I get going on this is, you probably said, well, I'm coming to this academic presentation, the scholarly presentation. But what you didn't know is I'm going to try to proselytize you into a care revolution. So I want you to leave the talk with Viva the Revolution and consider being part of it all. So I'm going to start with a story. And the story is one of the opening anecdotes in the book, but it's changed. Derek Black is the centerpiece of the original story, but Derek came out with a biography last year where they revealed that they are transitioning. And so it's now Adrian Black in there. So Derek Black who's 32. Well, I guess I should refer to them as Adrian from now on. Adrian is 32 today and grew up as the heir apparent to the white nationalist movement. Their godfather was David Duke, who was head of the Ku Klux Klan. Father started one of the most important white nationalist websites called Stormfront. And some people credit him with actually coining the term white nationalism. And so his family was steeped in this. And even as a young person, Adrian was brought into the movement and was articulate, smart, and was part of creating a website for young people in the white nationalist movement, and had their own radio show. And they were really good at defending the positions of white nationalism. Didn't bother them when they got pointed questions. They were always able to respond and deflect the questions. And an interesting character to focus on, because this is then Derek with their father on the joint show that they had. Because how do you care for somebody like this, who espouses such hatred for other people? Seems almost, not redeemable, right? Adrian, still Derek back then, but decides to go to college and went to the New College of Florida. And mostly for financial considerations, went to this state school in Florida. But kept a low profile because, remember, they had a radio show and were quite public about this. Not just a radio show, but would go to white nationalist events and be one of the favorite speakers, this young person who was talking, espousing white nationalism. And so kept a low profile. In fact, used their middle name to hide the fact that it was Derek at the time. Eventually, it happened that somebody figured out that they were there, and there was a big confrontation on campus, and there was lots of yelling. But remember, they were skilled at handling confrontations like that. So didn't really faze him too much. But there were a group of young people, mostly Jewish, that decided to befriend Adrian. And they had meals together and engaged one another. And they clearly did not agree with their position, but continued to engage them as a person. And as I said, had meals, even had eventually Seder together. And over the course of several years, Adrian began to question their beliefs and started to think deeply about this, and had a very public kind of coming out of white nationalism in a letter that was published in the New York Times. And this was momentous, and there was a lot of vitriol coming from the white nationalist community about this, a lot of threats and hate mail because of this. And there were a lot of interviews with Adrian, and they talked about, well, I was going to college and was confronting new ideas, but it was really the relationships, the care work that these people did, the time and effort, felt like they tried to understand him. Remember, understanding does not mean assent, just they tried to understand what Derek at that time was saying. And this allowed them to have this major change of heart. So this can be described as a kind of moral epiphany. I talked about moral epiphanies in one of the plenary sessions of the Care Ethics Research Consortium meeting in online version in January. And moral epiphanies, these kind of aha moments, can actually be fomented through caring situations. So what happens when you're in a caring community? You can empathize with one another. You can connect with other people and have insights as to what they're going through, even if they're very different. And this kind of transformation can be fomented by care. There are even articles about trying to do this, with some intentionality in education situations. So, does addressing care ethics make sense in the present moment? There is so much uncaring about this going on, in the world. It's hard to see, how care fits in all this. But in some ways, it's one of the only things that does make sense to talk about, because all of our problems today can, in some senses, be traced back to care or the lack of care. Take, for instance, the big, from a couple of summers ago, Black Lives Movement, which is still, alive today and going. But the Black Lives Movement was a cry for, why doesn't anybody care for us? What's, we can see a lot of the issues in the world, the conflicts in the world, the degradation of the environment in care terms, in terms of who gets cared for and how they are cared for. So that begs the question of what we're talking about in terms of care, and I'll go into some of the what care is and what care isn't in a bit. But in all the talks I give early on, we have this conversation just to remind people, because I think you know this, but just to remind people how essential care is in people's lives. In the book, I talk about care as a kind of categorical imperative. But you wouldn't be alive today if it weren't for care. Somebody caring for you right from the get-go. As babies, we're completely vulnerable, and we require people to care for us, or we die. And this idea that care is important is getting looked at by many different authors. We have the story we tell ourselves about, survival of the fittest, and the reason civilization has gone on for so long is the best rising to the top, competition, and so forth. But another story that can be told is that it's because of connection and compassion and working together that we have survived, and that care is an essential part of that. But whether you're looking at our planet in terms of other mammals, from psychology, somebody like Jamal Zaki at Stanford, who says that there's currently a war going on in empathy, and that empathy is something that we can actually get better at. Some people think like, oh, you have it or you don't have, and he's very set on the idea that we can develop that. Or you look at these broad kind of sociological narratives about how civilization has become more empathetic over time. And I know that empathy is a charged word, and there's some really good criticisms of empathy. However, I like to think of the concept of attuned empathy. There's even some care ethicists like Michael Sloat. Michael Sloat was a virtue ethicist for a long time, made his name there, and eventually became a care ethics convert. And that's what it writes about. And he actually argues that empathy is the center point of everything in care ethics. And I think empathy is very important, but I think there's more to it than just empathy. And I think that empathy is attuned by knowledge as well. And, but it is important. So care, again, is so central. We are cared for in so many different ways, in so many different relationships, from transactional ones to familial ones, that we can't emphasize enough how important care is. And perhaps many of you, of course, are familiar with this, but this is the most repeated definition of care, coming from one of the great contemporary care ethicists, political care ethicist, Joan Tronto, saying that on the most general level, we suggest that caring be viewed as a species activity that includes everything we do to maintain, continue to repair our world so that we can live in it as well as possible. That world includes our bodies, ourselves, and our environment, all of which we seek to interweave in a complex, life-sustaining web. So it's a very general definition. There's lots of other definitions of care. But it does kind of strike a chord with a lot of people. I want to go a little bit further into some terminology. So care is the basic one, a basic human need that sustains us and allows us to flourish. We humans have always cared, and we always will care. Even under the worst circumstances, care emerges in it. There are great stories of care that emerge in concentration camps, right? The worst uncaring kind of circumstances. Caring emerging in prison communities that comes through. So care is, I think in one publication I talked about it, care is almost like that weed that grows on the sidewalk between the cement. It cannot be stopped in a certain kind of way. But it can be, mitigated and burdened, but it's always there. So care ethics is a relational approach to morality. It centers on context. It allows for emotions and imagination. But the relationality is the centerpiece of what makes it different from other moral approaches. And a term that I like to use, and maybe is a little newer in the literature, but other people are using it as well, is the idea of care theory. One of the problems with the term care ethics is that it carries a little bit of baggage from Western civilization of being really focused on adjudicating dilemmas. And so like one of the common questions, students that are first being exposed to it or whatever will say, well, what would a care ethicist say about this? How would a care ethicist solve that? And in some ways, that is important, but it's not the right question. Because care ethics does a different kind of work than other ethics. And I think we can capture that a little bit better with referring it to in a broader sense in terms of care theory. Because caring isn't just about solving problems. It contributes to that. It contributes to the normative life. But it's also about who we are, how we carry ourselves in this world. It's also about the fact that we are embodied beings, and this allows for the bringing in of aesthetics. It's one of the rising fields in care theory right now, aesthetics, but also epistemology, ontology. And so I prefer this kind of broad, and I think there are many great care theorists doing work across a variety of disciplines. The history, real quickly, is, the story we tell in the Western world is that in the 1980s, care ethicists like Carol Gilligan and Nell Noddings first began using these books, these words. And there was something in the atmosphere about care and relationality. And we find folks around that time talking about care, not just these, but people like Gloria Anzaldúa have a relationality. Maybe she didn't use the word care ethics, but Gilligan wrote her book in '82. Nell Noddings, it came out in '83. And they hardly refer to each other, but they're talking about the same thing, in terms of care ethics. The early pieces are just trying to understand and name what is going on. And so it's very interpersonally developed, oftentimes maybe overly focused on familial structures. And a lot of times my students are very critical of some of those early writings because of that bias. But I think what they forget is they were blazing the trail. They were doing what feminists have always done, naming the previously unnamed. And so, yeah, they maybe were not as inclusive and broad-minded as they could have been. But very quickly thereafter, we get political and social theory coming in with folks like Joan Tronto, Virginia Held, and others. And today, care ethics is across many different disciplines, and it is a worldwide phenomenon. And we can find intellectual genealogies that look back, see, some people go back to like the moral sentimentalists and the David Humes of the world. Others, like me, think back to Jane Addams and the work of American pragmatists. But we can find threads of care that go back further. But I started this slide by saying the story the Western world tells about this, because, of course, there are many cultures around the world, indigenous cultures and others, that have really deep and complex understandings of care. They may not have ever called it care ethics, but it's, I think it's hubris for us to think that we cornered the market about thinking about care, beginning in the 1980s. There's a lot of great work that can be done, and it's starting to emerge in the literature. People talking about some of the indigenous origins. So today, what started as a cottage industry, what I like to say is that when I started working on care in the 1990s, I could read everything. I could keep up with it, right? You could read everything that came out because there wasn't that much. But today it is impossible, and so I refer to this as the golden age of care theory. And I think it truly is. And I think, you know, the fact that I'm here is a little bit of an example of that. But we have so many publications on so many different fronts. I'm constantly discovering things I didn't know about. A student this year told me about ethical journalism, applying the ethics of care. There are books in law on care ethics, geography, anthropology, education. The list just goes on, and it's picking up a momentum. We have some great podcasts, including the Careful Thinking podcast that Peter was interviewed on, and people applying to methodology, and I mentioned the care aesthetics before, and a journal, an international organization called the Care Ethics Research Consortium. We have a care forum in the United States that's a Zoom meeting for care scholars that occurs several times during each academic year, about 4 times each academic year. And some of this care is starting to seep into public discourse. A book came out last year written by a New York Times best-selling journalist, not an academic, about, she'd done her research, though. She had interviewed folks like me to understand it better, but she was writing about the wonders of care. She was a late mother, had a child later in life, and was a feminist, and so was very afraid of what care would do to her life. And she was pleasantly surprised, and she writes about the wonders of care from that perspective in a fairly sophisticated way. And in the UK, there's been another popular author, a Guardian writer, who has written about care. And we're seeing it on the edges of some political discussions. People like Barack Obama talked about care and masculinity. Biden talked about care. Kamala Harris talked about the care economy. And they're not using it quite in this way, but it's nice to see them use the word care. I also want to quickly mention the international of this. We have care scholars in every continent. Well, I'm exaggerating because Antarctica does not. But otherwise, we have care scholars in every continent working. And just last year, I spent a month in Japan working with care ethicists there. And I've been in Italy and the UK. The Netherlands is a hot spot for care because they have a graduate program at the University of Humanistic Studies in care. Okay, so some characteristics of care theory, and some of this is more my view on things than maybe always the general opinion, but here's a couple of things. I think that care theory is in many ways somewhat postmodern, in that the human condition doesn't always fit neatly into categories. So that's the sense of postmodern that I'm using. And so a lot of the binaries that we often apply to things, I don't think works with care theory. So I don't think about like care, not care. Think of it more on continuums and gradations. Another is it's not extreme altruism. A lot of people, the word care is so common, it carries a lot of baggage into any conversation. And so some people think that you have to be extremely, if you're a caring person, then you're just completely selfless, right? Or you're altruism. And this was the scourge of and burden of care for women for a long time, right? That they were expected to be altruistic. And that's why early on, when care theory first came out, a lot of feminists would go, wait a second, I don't know about celebrating this, you know, because it has been a weight on our shoulders for a long time. But it's not. It's not intended in that way. It is, there is a lot of discussion about self-care. There is no litmus test. It's not Kantianism. There's no litmus test for perfection. You can care for others and care for yourself at the same time. You can have multiple goals. One of the criticisms I got about the Derek Black story was somebody said, well, were they really caring because did they actually have the goal of converting? So is that really caring? And I say that care is non-perfectionist. It's a non-ideal theory. You can never perfectly, who can perfectly care for somebody else? Nobody can perfectly care for somebody else. You can do better, but you can't do it perfectly, and you can't care for everybody. So it's a non-ideal theory wrapped around an ideal of care, But, and so we need to drop those standards of perfection from it. I think about it as a process morality. I don't know if you've heard of process philosophy or process theology, but generally speaking, it's the idea that everything is in process. And I think care in itself is a process. They go through. It has a temporal dimension to it. Again, much different than our normal consideration of what an ethic is, because a lot of what we think of ethic is, I come to a decision, okay, how many, when do you have the most amount of good for the most number of people? Okay, now that's what you should do. But care is this process. It's iterative, it takes time. Obviously, you can get care that doesn't take time, like if you are taken to an emergency room or something like that. But it's generally speaking a process morality. And it's humanist, and I would hope post-humanist, and I argue for this in the latter part of the book. But there's been a lot of discussion. It does not require any kind of deity determining the goods at the end, and we've getting more and more theorists who are applying care to non-humans and the environment. So I think it has post-humanist element to it. So I say all those things because, again, a lot of the care is one of the most common words that is used. And there's also the problem of translation into different countries and cultural contexts. I know that the French and the Italians, and maybe the Czech, I don't know, have trouble with the word care because it means something different. The Italians often think of care as cure, and so this was really a different way of thinking about things. And the French, like when they tried to translate some of my work, they threw at me all different kinds of words to use because they weren't sure about which one actually captured it. So in the book, I tackle the idea of what is good care. And this is a really kind of fraught thing. And for good reasons, right? In fact, there are many authors, care theorists, that say that you can't really talk about good care. And they're right in a certain way. What right do I, as a privileged white male, have to tell people what good care is when they're in a different context, in a different situation? I don't. So I go about, and I'll lay this out in the next slide, but I go about this in a non-kind of specific way, talking about the skills and directions of what would make for better care, not the specifics of it in any particular situation. But I want to mention that care itself is a morally neutral term. And that's the reason I wanted to explore what good care is, because a lot of people use the word care and they assume that it is good care. But of course, if you work in crip theory, or if you're doing post-colonial studies, care is often a very bad word because it carries the baggage of all kinds of paternalism and taking away people's agency. So, so it's a morally neutral term, so that's why I wanted to get at what good care is. We know that abusers often use the word care, but context is so important that it does matter how we describe it. So in one of the centerpieces of the book and a chapter in that theoretical section, I spent a lot of time talking about the idea of good care. So how do we distinguish care? Again, I'm not talking about perfect care, because that's just not possible, but I'm thinking about it in terms of this process morality and thinking in terms of continuums rather than specific categories. And so I see three elements to it, and these elements are not in any particular order, or they don't have to, sometimes they're not even present at all, and they're interrelated. But the first is humble inquiry, and the adjective of being humble, the humility, is central to this. Because if I want to care for somebody, I really need to listen. I need to understand where they're at. And it's so easy to have assumptions and bring into it your own experiences and say, I know what they need. But if we're going to listen and understand, we need to approach a situation through humble inquiry, being open to what they actually have to say. You know, even if it's the 10th person with a similar problem, their circumstances are their own, and it's important to stay humble about this. Inclusive connection. Here, again, the adjective is important, but making some kind of connection to somebody raises the stakes motivationally and so forth on how we care for one another. This is where our imagination comes into play. I often talk about the empathetic imagination. And it's an attuned empathy because we attune it with knowledge. So I start to make a connection. I want to understand what this person is going through emotionally, contextually. But, and I come to some imaginative propositions, but I have to constantly check it. That's why this is a process. Because I can be wrong in what I imagine. But at some point, I have to move forward, and so I try some things. And sometimes, I make mistakes. Inclusive is important here because it's easy to care for those people who are you have proximal relations with, right? The people who are close to you, those are the easy ones to care for. The people who are like you are the easy ones to care for. The whole project of social and political care is how do we be more inclusive about this? How do we bring more people into the circle of care? And then finally, there's responsive action. Ultimately, care is always an action of some kind. It's not saying, oh, I care about the whales or something. It has to take some kind of manifestation. It has to be enacted. And that enaction has to be responsive to the situation. The old joke about going to a doctor and they say, take 2 aspirin and call me in the morning, that rote kind of answer, that's not responsive to the situation. You've got to see the people where they're at. So these are 3 skills, part of the methodology, part of the process. I don't know how I will care for somebody, but these will help guide me to perhaps a better place, in terms of caring for them. And because I don't know, in the chapter I have about normativity, I talk about care as having an emergent normativity. That what I should do, what are the norms, what I should do in any given situation emerge from the circumstances. And that's, again, a little bit divergent from how we usually talk about normativity. As I said before, we can always do more, but we're embodied beings, and there are obviously limits, to how we can do this. And the other thing I talk a great deal about is committing to care. There's been a lot of good work by political theorists about care responsibilities. How do we distribute care responsibilities in society? And I think that discussion is very, very important. But I also think that the flip side of that is we have to recognize that we want to care and get better at that. So committing to care is, in a sense, taking responsibility for care, owning the care. A commitment is something that comes from the self, rather than being imposed from outside. So it's not that I'm doing this because of some rule. I'm doing it because I want to care. I can care. My body is built to care. In normal circumstances, there's all kinds of narratives that prevent me from caring, but committing to care has that kind of motivational force to it, an internal drive. All right. The spirit of care is this. I take advantage of what is a lot of recent work on ethos. There's a lot of ethotic theory out there, and I try to bring some themes from it, thinking about ethos as kind of co-created between self and society, and it melding kind of a general morality with emotional disposition. And so as embodied beings, we feel and experience the world, and there's a kind of a care aesthetic that's right in front of us all the time. But as some of my colleagues have worked out, there can be a kind of contagion. When you're with a group and they are caring, you see how that is done, and there can be a kind of spreading of that spirit of caring, a kind of spirituality to it. It makes it easier to understand and see and connect. And so can we create institutions, groups that have a kind of spirit of care to them, an ethos of care? Another aspect that I talk a great deal about is moral progress. I mentioned before the idea of epiphanies, and of course, it's a very contested term. Some people say there can't be any moral progress, and then there's the question of whose moral progress. But moral progress can occur, and I think care, again, provides the space for that and the security to make that kind of thing happen. One of the examples I use in the United States is that we go back 20 years, the country was still passing laws against marriage between people of the same sex. The states were still passing laws about that. And now, Gallup polls and so forth have shown the biggest dispositional flip that they've seen on any issue is how more people think that same-sex marriage is okay. What changed? What changed? Did the religions change their rules about same-sex marriage? That didn't happen. What changed was people's exposures to it, seeing it on television, in movies, learning that their friends and family are gay, and seeing and coming into a better space of imagining this. And that's a kind of moral progress that came from caring. And I think that more of that is possible. So the time is right for a care revolution. Yeah. A few more things about that. So the word revolution, the first thing you usually think about are these violent upheavals of society where people try to instantiate a better future for them. And you think about people storming the Bastille or something like this in terms of revolutions. But Eva von Redeker, and this is an advertisement for right, yeah. There you go. Yes, she makes a very compelling argument that revolutions are actually processes, that they take time, and they're even when you have, sometimes you have revolutions that have these major upheaval events to them, the kinds that you can take photographs of or paintings about. And other times they are slow and they just, they kind of occur. And so you can think about perhaps the same-sex marriage revolution versus versus a political kind of revolutions. But I find, and I have not spoken to her, and you can ask this question, I find ideas of care in her writing. She says some revolutions can challenge not just how we are ruled, but who we are, who owns what, how we relate to one another, and how we reproduce our material life. Yes, a process of transformation. Yeah, so I said those things. But it's, I thought it was a wonderfully compelling book. And I end my book talking about her theories on this and how it might relate to a care revolution. And there are others who have been, talking about this, this kind of thing. There's a political theorist, Deborah Stone, who, went backwards, who said that caring is the essential democratic act, the prerequisite to voting, joining associations, attending meetings, holding office, and all other ways. We sustain democracy. The other ways we sustain democracy. Care, the noun, requires families and workers who care, the verb. Caring the activity breeds caring the attitude, and caring the attitude seeds caring the politics. That is why you need a care movement. And these other social theorists have talked about how transformation happens in society. Contemporary sociologist Ruha Benjamin says it is impossible to change a social structure without changing its culture, and we can't change culture without changing ourselves. Historian Robin D. Kelly, in discussing black radicalism, says making a revolution is not a series of clever maneuvers and tactics, but a process that can and must transform us. If you go to the Black Lives Matter website and look about their philosophy, there is a lot of care built into it, inclusive care built into it. The renowned activists James Boggs and Grace Lee Boggs talk about the fact that any revolution will require us being new man, new woman, new concepts of the relations between people. And I think a care revolution fits this. I think it's particularly important now because it can counter the neoliberal paradigm of individualism, productivity, capital markets. The same Deborah Stone I mentioned earlier said, we have the Bill of Rights, we have the civil rights, and now we need to have a right to care, and it's going to take a movement to get it. And back in 2005, Joan Tronto was saying, redefining care as a concern that is neither feminine or masculine but human, and to overcome the indifference of a political system that benefits the well-to-do, who currently benefit from the availability of inexpensive care, assistance at their beck and call. So she's saying that even back then, we need that. So the care revolution I'm talking about is both personal and political. At times like this, when it seems like there is no hope, the issues seem too big, we can get to work in the streets and in the movements, but we can also get to work in our individual relationships and interactions with other people to help create this care. Relating what is going on in the proximal to what is going on in the political, and keeping that connection tight. It is true, we can say that there is a crisis of care out there, and we can point to lots of things, and it is true. But with a world with so many billions of people in it, so diverse, more than one truth can be at the same time. And it is also true that there are many people doing incredible acts of care all the time. And you can find them. They don't get as much press, but there are organizations and people doing it. And we need to tap in to the kinds of things that they're doing. Political sociologists, social movement scholars said social movements and their members engage in care work when they aim at creating, sustaining, and retaining social relations, as well as fulfilling the needs of their members and other groups. So seeing that social political activity as a kind of care work. And this is a poet actually from Oregon who says, I believe care is the only useful revolutionary act because it is the only one that actively transcends prejudice to address areas of need. It is not overly romantic or intoxicating. It is the sober, critical analysis of what is and isn't, working to heal the long-standing wounds we hold hidden behind our flags and armor. It's less sword and shield, more needle and thread. Finally, Nell Noddings said that the caring response is always, I am here. I am here. I'm here for you. And so our revolutionary care should mimic that I am here for you. How can we be more here for one another? How can we work together on this? So I want you to go out there and join the revolution. Join the care revolution. I should have had T-shirts or something for you all. Thank you very much for listening.